Welcome back. So in this set of videos, we're going to be starting on what is really a new unit in the course. The first few weeks we've looked at some arguments, both anthropocentric and non-anthropocentric, for various kinds of moral obligation or moral relation with the environment, between humans and the environment. What we'll be looking at for the next few weeks is a number of movements that have tried to push for one or another kind of political program regarding the relation between humans and the environment. So we're introducing now a new political dimension to the discussion. And these movements are interesting, they are interesting theoretically for sure, because they all have a kind of each of them has its own kind of ideology, has its own main points that it takes to be true, or main points of commitment that define it. But it's also interesting from a historical and a practical perspective, because these movements have actually been influential. There are different iterations and kind of subgroups within the environmental movement or environmentalist movements more generally. And the first of these that we'll look at is a very famous movement known as deep ecology. The term deep ecology was coined by Arne Næss, who is a Norwegian thinker, Norwegian philosopher, in 1973 in a short paper that we have read for the course. And the big point of this paper is to contrast what Næss calls the shallow ecology movement, and which is summarized on the slide here, with what he calls the deep ecology movement, which is summarized in his essay in 7 points. And so what I've done here, of course, is just present these points in a kind of truncated form for you to look over. I will actually save discussing them in more detail for a future video, but I will leave it to you to kind of think a little bit about what the difference is between the shallow ecology and the deep ecology movement, and perhaps even more importantly, to ask yourself whether you agree with each of these points in the deep ecology movement, whether you think that Arne Næss is onto something, or is right in what he's proposing in these different points. Another of the movements that we'll consider in this unit is called EarthFirst, with an exclamation point at the end. Now, this was a movement that started in the 1980s, spearheaded by someone named Dave Foreman. We'll read a little bit about Foreman in the readings for this week. And the basic idea here was that the prior iterations of the environmental movement had been too conciliatory and too concessive. They had given too much to the opposite side, and what was needed was a more radical and fundamental commitment, a commitment that put the earth first, above and before human interests. So you can see a kind of ecocentrist core to what EarthFirst was about. And what you have in this slide, incidentally, is an image of some EarthFirst members standing in front of a bulldozer to basically to prevent the bulldozer from going on to do whatever kind of development project it was going to do, which would disrupt the wilderness area. And so the protesters here are basically saying, look, if you want to get to the wilderness area, you got to go through us. You're going to have to kill us if you're going to break up this natural environment in this way. Other techniques that EarthFirst advocated included industrial sabotage, that is somehow interfering with the operation of the machinery that would be used in such development projects that would disrupt natural environments. And they also they also advocated for a time, eventually they backed off of this practice, but something called spiking trees, which is basically putting some kind of metal or ceramic or other hard material into a tree. You usually have to hammer it in. And what this means is that if someone tries to fell the tree or to log the tree, that is like cut it up with a saw, then they can hit this metal object and it can break the saw, or it can stop the machinery, the logging machinery, from working. So some fairly radical tactics here from EarthFirst to protect the environment. And on this slide, I've given you an image of Dave Foreman, the founder, one of the founders of EarthFirst, but certainly an important, influential early leader of EarthFirst, and his statement, his draft of the EarthFirst Statement of Principles. And so again, I won't read through them here, but I encourage you to read through them with a critical eye and ask yourself where you agree or disagree with these principles. Do you agree with them all, or are there places where you would break with EarthFirst, where you see that there is some problem with the EarthFirst program? Returning for a moment to deep ecology, I just want to point out that in 1985, George Sessions and Bill Duvall published a book, a very influential book on deep ecology. So Arne Naess's ideas had been discussed and had been kind of percolating and had an influence, a wide influence on a number of different people within the environmental movement, broadly speaking. And those people gradually, that kind of conversation and influence of the ideas eventually distilled into Sessions and Duvall's book. Sessions and Duvall's book also includes a number of appendices written by different authors. There's something about the book that has a kind of compiled quality to it. It looks like they're gathering sources from lots of different places. They're trying to kind of put everything, put a whole team together in defense of deep ecology, and put a lot of different sources together to clarify or to kind of make up the body of what deep ecology is. So you'll notice there are long poems, passages from poems that are quoted in the book and from other sources. So it's a very kind of patchwork production, the book. But one thing to notice is that at one place in this book from 1985, Sessions and Duvall give their own set of basic principles of deep ecology, which they then immediately after have Arne Naess help to explain for them. So it's clear that Naess is still involved in the deep ecology movement and in the work that Duvall and Sessions are doing. But something to notice is that these basic principles from 1985 are a little bit different from the principles from 1973. Some things have changed. Maybe some things have been added and some things have been taken away. So I would encourage you here to, just as with the previous lists of principles, you can ask which of these from 1985, deep ecology, which of these do I agree with and which do I disagree with? But also just as a point of, in part, just as a point of history, or thinking about the way that the deep ecology movement may have changed between 73 and 85. I would encourage you also to ask, what is the same and what is different most fundamentally about the principles from 85 in comparison with the principles from 73?